The hero killer might be the most recognizable type of healthcare murderer. There have been many examples, but German intensive care nurse Niels Högel is one of the most striking. Due to the frequent cardiac arrests that occurred during Högel's shifts and his undeniable skill at saving those patients, Högel's colleagues dubbed him Resuscitation Rambo and even fashioned him a necklace out of used adrenaline syringes. There was only one small problem. Högel was himself deliberately causing the cardiac arrests by injecting his patients with powerful drugs such as Licodeine and amiodarone. Högel had commenced working in the intensive care unit in Oldenburg Clinic at the age of 21. 2 years after he joined the department, hospital administrators noticed an unusual spike in resuscitations and deaths, and Högel was transferred to the anesthesiology department under a cloud of suspicion. His new supervisors quickly grew uneasy about the number of emergent situations he continued to find himself in, but the hospital still did not fire Högel. Instead, they paid him severance and gave him a reference that noted his ability to act prudently and in an objectively correct manner in critical situations. This reference enabled Högel to obtain a new job at a clinic in nearby Delmenhorst, where he was again soon noted to be involved in more emergencies and fatalities than he should have been. At the same All the same, in the absence of clear-cut evidence, hospital administrators once again failed to act definitively. It would be several more years before a colleague finally caught Högel standing over a dying patient with 4 empty vials of unprescribed medication nearby. The ensuing police investigation noted that deaths had almost doubled since Högel's arrival at Delmenhorst, and he was ultimately convicted of 85 counts of murder. The true number of victims is believed to be higher still, and many of the deaths could undoubtedly have been avoided if the hospitals who employed Högel had acted on their first suspicions. Why did Niels Högel do it? Like many so-called hero killers, his primary motivation seems not to have been to harm the patients under his care, but rather to impress his colleagues with his skill in saving them. The fact that the patients he poisoned often did die seems to have merely been the cost of doing business. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and this little excerpt you just heard is from a book with the title of Sometimes People Die by our guest Simon Stephenson. Friend of the show, am taking the liberty calling him because he was here before and he wanted to come back, and then we offered him this date. Sometimes People Die is an insane thriller, a hospital thriller, a medical thriller told from the perspective of a young doctor who is also addicted to opioids. And he's working in a London area hospital. There is a serial killer on the loose. Simon puts pedal to the metal with this one. I mean, it's a relentless, fast-paced story, and he weaves in all the big questions. Is life just kind of random, in terms of who lives and who dies? What is addiction? What is a diagnosis? What does diagnosis really mean? And why do people who heal for a living so often self-destruct? I mean, the question is also why do they kill people, but why do they self-destruct in terms of you know addiction and other self-destructive behavior that we will get into. And sprinkled in between the narrative are these short biographies of serial killers from within the medical profession. Let's go inside the theater. I just realized I hope it's not too dark here outside. um, oh, inside it's nice and bright. Camera, please follow me. Welcome, everyone. We have an almost full house here. Look at this. If you don't have seats, hello, Berrigan. I think you might not have a seat here. Let's see if Simon is already here. Yes. Let me climb onto the stage. Welcome, Simon Stephenson. Welcome back to the Second Life Book Club.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be back.
Now, right from the beginning, Simon, you have been a doctor, I understand.
Exactly. Yeah, that was my first. I always call it my real career, but it's not my real career anymore. But yeah, I was a doctor for about 10 years. I
Well,
went back
you're
into law.
correct. You're a screenwriter. Screenwriters, that's not a career. They're just like writing stuff, right?
It just feels like riding your luck is what you should as a screenwriter, and I think you do it until it runs out. Like they say, the average length of a screenwriter's career in Hollywood is about 5 years, and I've been at it for 10. So I'm sure my number must be up soon.
Why did you quit medicine?
Yeah, so like there's lots of people that kind of assumed that like I must have hated it, and because obviously there are quite a few unhappy doctors out there, but I loved it. I mean, I really did, and it was just I just loved writing that bit more. I think I think that's three-quarters of the answer, and then the other quarter of the answer is probably that even though medicine gives you things that you never get in any other job, and especially like the camaraderie of being on the wards with your colleagues is you know infinitely better than often sitting by yourself in a room as a writer. um
Right.
but then I think that the difference is just like I probably probably a quarter of the reason for changing was I just found the job unsustainable. Like I just couldn't do it. Like it just
Yeah.
demands everything from you, and I just have undying respect for my colleagues who were able to do it, and in some ways I think I just wasn't tough enough.
And that is real. I mean, I love the book a lot, Simon. It's really, really a fantastic book. And there's a lot of you have a lot of fans here from your previous appearance with Set My Heart to Five. But this book is so good in describing exactly what you're saying now. I mean, the I don't know how much people are aware of how tough it is to be a doctor, especially in a hospital. I mean, let's talk specifically about being in a hospital. And it's like a constant war zone where I don't know how people do it. I know a lot of doctors from friends who I graduated high school with, and it's just insane. And you describe it too. I mean, we I guess everybody can operate on a few hours of sleep here and there, but not in a profession where it demands such a precise a work of precision. If you're a surgeon or if you're just diagnosing someone, it's insane.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's day after day, year after year, and it just gets more complicated with every passing year. Like, there's just more and more, treatments and more diagnoses, and yeah, it's I think the combination of trying to keep up to date, trying to work the shifts, trying to if you're still a doctor in training, trying to pass your exams, while still also trying to have some kind of life outside of that. It's tough.
I'm going to actually switch gears because I wanted to keep this for later, but I'm going to
Yeah.
read this little excerpt here. There is a suicide in the book, and it's the way you wrote it is absolutely brilliant, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I want to say that the character who commits suicide in the book is the way you describe him reminds me of a friend who committed suicide in his mid 20s. People who you would describe as kind and life affirming, loving people who you would never have guessed that they would do that. And especially in the context now of doctors committing suicide, I want to read this little excerpt here that I put on the board. This is from your book. It is not uncommon for doctors to kill themselves, but so far I had been mercifully untouched by it. That's the first person narrator. Anesthetists and psychiatrists always top those grim tables. The former have the drugs to do it effectively. The latter know best how to conceal their intentions. But our collective war against disease is one of attrition, and suicide is an occupational hazard for us all. How could it not be? When we take an unusually conscientious and empathic group of people, blur their boundaries between life and death daily, then work them to exhaustion in a culture so binary it can admit only complete success or abject failure. Talk a little bit, Sam, about the binary culture. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a really interesting topic that I could talk for hours about. So, In medicine, the like I guess I'm sure it's the same all around the world, but it's to have those academic qualifications. It tends to be a certain kind of high achiever that wants to go into that profession, and I don't mean that academic high achievement is the only kind of high achievement at all, but it does sort of select for this particular group of people that are always they came top in everything during high school, and
Right.
suddenly sort of the challenge of the real world of when you actually fail things is very difficult. And I think that bleeds into, so in medicine we talk a lot about like the scapegoat culture. So for instance, if something goes wrong, the classic thing, and you've probably all seen the news stories, is that they try and find one particular doctor to blame it on, that it was this guy's fault because he accidentally injected this person with the wrong thing. And over the past 20 years, medicine's tried to change that, and they've tried to learn a lot from um, airline culture. So airline safety culture is really different. It's kind of a like a no fault culture. So anytime a plane, and this is why planes are so safe, is anytime a plane crashes, is they don't just say, oh well, this pilot was an idiot, he did it wrong. They say, what were the systems failures that led to this person being
Right.
able to make this mistake. Whereas in medicine, traditionally, we'd be more like, which idiot made this mistake and how can we
Right.
punish
Right.
them? So I guess that's a big part of what I was getting at there. That
But this
like,
is interesting what you were saying. Sorry to interrupt you. I
no,
want to pinpoint the thing that you said, that when you put people who are used to, working hard and the overachiever type, and I know exactly one of my best friends. She would always went to high school with her, and she would always complain about, oh, I only got an A minus on this one, and she
yeah,
was breaking down, and I was like, dude, I'm like happy that I don't have to complete the whole class here. What are you talking about? And so there maybe is an inability to deal with that failures, I guess what you're saying, right? I mean, this is something that they may not have had to learn ever.
absolutely. Like they always say that it's your the postgraduate exams that you sit in the UK, so you've already qualified as a doctor and you're in training to be some kind of specialist, and they have a failure rate of about 50% the first time you sit it. And nobody sitting that exam has ever failed an exam in their life,
Mm.
and it is genuinely this sort of this big psychological shift that you have to go through. I guess it's tied to perfectionism, right? Your friend that wants the A plus, like I guess a lot of people that end up being doctors or nurses are kind of perfectionists in lots of ways, and
Yep.
as we know, the world isn't perfect. People make mistakes, things happen, things don't go the way you want them to, and I think that's part of it sometimes in medicine.
Interesting, because that friend of mine also had a lot of alcohol problems, which is also
Mm,
something very common. And that's what you're right about. Matter of fact, and we're going to talk about the murders too, folks. Don't worry about it.
mm.
I'm going to say later what I say now, that I hate true crime, but I know my audience maybe loves it. And this hits all the buttons. But one of the things is that one of the great things about this novel is that it's told from the perspective of a an opioid addicted physician who's a very nice guy, but he has a drug problem. And this excerpt here that I put up, you write the unspeakable, or the narrator writes, the unspeakable truth is this: most of us addicts know both the risks and the benefits, and simply make a clear-eyed choice that the latter outweigh the former. The risks, of course, are well documented: poverty, sickness, prison, and death. If you are not an addict yourself, you are no doubt wondering what benefit could possibly outweigh those horrors. Well, how about this one? The feeling of honey slowly trickling down your spine until nothing else in the world matters. So here the narrator, in the book, he steals drugs. I mean, he has access to the drugs through the hospital. But Simon, talk also a little bit about the frequency. And I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, this is the way to deal with this relentless stress in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there definitely is a significant issue with medical staff becoming addicted to opioids. It absolutely happens, and for the reasons that you say, that it's right there. It's the way to feel better, and it's sitting on the counter right there. Um, I think it's not quite as bad now as it used to be. And again, I don't want to give the impression that there's lots of, because it's a very small minority. But even I think the small minority now is a lot smaller in terms of, I think over the past decade or two, we've become a lot more aware of the risks of opioids and the risks of becoming addicted to them. But it's certainly it's one of the few jobs where you can actually access pharmaceutical grade opioids.
Right. And yeah, what is really, I mean, have you encountered in your work that people actually are high while they are performing surgery?
No, no, I've never. I mean, I've definitely had a couple of colleagues who have have these problems. Um, I've certainly never seen any. I never saw any issues with their work, and it was only afterwards when they get suspended and sent in front of the medical regulator, that you think, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't. I missed it. And I think that's part of what happens in the book, is that it is actually very easy to miss things like that. Like particularly again, like everyone's exhausted and all the time anyway, right? And isn't eating well because they're at hospital all the time. And so it's not uncommon for people to look like they're on drugs if they're a junior doctor, and they're just tired. They just haven't slept enough.
This is really the part of the, I mean, this goes through the book from start to finish, that also the fact that people do die. I mean, that I find the title actually quite genius. Sometimes people die. In what, tell us in what, how is that referenced in the book actually?
Yeah, so it's sort of I think part of the strangest thing about being a doctor for me was, as you alluded to, kind of the randomness of death. That like
Hmm.
this can just this can just happen, um, like with luck. That you happen to be. The obvious one is like you're crossing the street and you get hit by a bus, and I think we like to think that our lives have narrative and meaning and purpose, and we're going to get to
Hmm.
do all the things that we want to do. And so often in hospital, you're around the people who are unlucky enough that that's not the case. um and I think the title of the book for me was sort of this thing that people are often looking for explanation.
Yeah, for a purpose, a
They
higher purpose, and
yeah.
why is this happening to me? Uh, Matter of fact, sometimes people die. I actually used that phrase with a woman just a couple of days ago at the free library that is out there on the main downtown area there. And we were talking about, she was saying like, oh, there's somebody died over there. And I said, well, sometimes people die. It just slipped out. And she looked at me like, what kind of heartless mother effer are you? So I mean, it's it's perceived that way as something really kind of like, yeah, heartless, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and I think sometimes in the hospital there is this thing that happens, that particularly if in, say like an emergency room, where it's not that you get to know people. Like if the patient's in the ward for 2 weeks, obviously you get to know them quite well. But sometimes if, say, you're, and I talk about this a bit in the book, that if you're working in the emergency room and a patient is brought in cardiac arrest, then there's a certain sequence of events that you have to follow, a certain algorithm of all the treatments that you try, and if they don't work, they don't work, and then that person is dead. And it's sort of like for those moments whilst you're looking after that person, like you're very much not thinking about who that person is. It's almost, I sometimes compare it as to, like, you go into this mode of being like a mechanic, right? That it's
Right.
just this brain needs blood that has oxygen and glucose in it. Like, can we manage to restore that supply? It comes down to that it really is a sort of very, yeah, mechanical basic thing, rather than even thinking about who this person is or what their dreams or aspirations are.
I think you actually write in the book, I have it here in my notes, patients remain, or they have to remain mere bodies because that protects the doctor emotionally and it maintains a cloak of invincibility that he needs in order for him to keep going in this crazy treadmill, basically. If he would get
Yeah,
emotionally involved, I mean, he would probably break down right away.
absolutely. I mean, definitely, like, there are always those patients that, for whatever reason, you form a bond with them or their family, or you see them more. But absolutely, yeah, I think um, if you reacted with what we would probably consider like appropriate emotion to everything that you encountered in the hospital on a daily basis, you wouldn't get very far.
Hmm.
You know.
There is a question from Little Brat on the YouTube actually. Hello, Little Brat. You're not in world. I think the computer is down, but she says, "Is it sometimes hard to talk about working as a doctor because it is so emotionally filled work?" I think what the Little Brat also means is maybe talking with people other than the profession. I think maybe that's similar to being a cop or something. I don't know what it applies to, but talk a little bit about that, sharing that. I mean, in my circle of friends, it's interesting that doctors or uh, the relationships that people have in the medical profession is usually with other people from the medical profession. And of course, yeah, you meet there, but I think it's such a extreme workplace. And again, we're maybe we should confine this to hospital work, right? Rather than sort of the cushiony private practice where you inject Botox for a living. I don't know, just making stuff up. But that kind of sort of war zone, right?
Yeah.
How do you transmit this to someone outside of the war zone, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think it's really hard to, and I think that those friendships that you make, especially in your sort of early years, they really are. They're kind of formed in the fire there. And so, for instance, one of my best friends is the person that was my night shift partner. I guess how like 10 years ago. We did all our night shifts together. So kind of 1 week in four, we worked through the night together, and yeah, like you just there's a like I think we would always have been friends anyway, but there's something about sharing those experiences with people,
Yeah.
and they are the person that you can talk to about it.
You're in the theater together. As a matter of fact, we are in the theater. If you're just tuning in, oh my God, that was a good transition. It, this is the Second Life Book Club with Simon Stephenson. His new book is Sometimes People Die. Um, a question here from Shyla in the chat. Do you think doctors need to appear correct when they may not know the best course of action? Or do you think that this is an expectation placed upon them by the patient, I'm assuming, or that no, that society places an expectation on
Oh,
them? So that's a great
yeah,
question. So basically, this is what I was thinking, and Charlie and I talked about this before, and where it's a vicious cycle of doctors wanting and having to appear so confident, and the patients expecting a clear-cut answer about their own diagnosis, I guess, right?
yeah. So great question, and I think this has some sort of geographical variation, because I always say that, like, the best thing I can ever hear from a doctor is, I don't know, let me look that up and come back to you.
Yeah.
Because then that it's someone that knows where the end of their knowledge lies. And I think that, for better or for worse, and it might be that in America it's a private healthcare system, in Britain we have socialized medicine, but certainly I've noticed since moving to America that, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of the doctors that I've seen over here for various things, um, they it is very difficult for them to say that they don't know something. And
Mm.
so, and sometimes they would rather give you a an incorrect answer than acknowledge that they don't know the answer, and that I think is really dangerous.
That is Thank you for saying that, Sam. This is so interesting. Shyla and I talked about this before, and this is exactly what she was saying, that like why can't some doctors admit, just like you were saying, hey, I don't know this, I'm going to look it up. and I'll
yeah,
get back to you. I mean, what is the problem here? This has to be probably the training, or I mean, a mix of things, but that has to be tackled, I think, early on in how doctors are trained in America. Shaila is also in America. I don't know how it
yeah.
is elsewhere, but yeah.
How is it in Germany? Like, what
I'm
happens there?
so healthy, Simon. I haven't
Yeah,
been to the doctor for a
good,
long time. Actually, at the
good for you.
beginning of COVID, I wanted to get a COVID test because my son had his girlfriend's father had COVID. And we
Yeah.
went to this doctor, and he was super unfriendly. And I said that, and my wife and I, we went there, and he was really unfriendly. And he was like, "So what happened?" And I go, "Well, my son's girlfriend's father has COVID." Oh, your son's girlfriend's father, hmm? So he was giving me this whole like, wow, are you crazy? I mean, the likelihood of
Yeah.
you contracting this is completely ridiculous. So
Wow.
he was giving off these vibes. My American
Yeah.
wife would say, well, that's typical German. That's not only doctors, that's all of them. Um, which there's maybe a little truth to that in this exact this generalization, but I don't know, Simon. This is a good question. I haven't been to a doctor for a very long time.
Yeah.
Um, Now, since we're on the subject actually of diagnosis, oh, there's a Stella. I'll post this question in a little bit. I want to go to diagnosis because we're about diagnosing, and I wrote this down for you. Um, what does diagnosis mean to you, Simon? Not the textbook answer, what it is and what it should be, but what does it mean to you? Because this is, I guess, what we're talking about, that the expectation is a clear-cut a, a diagnosis is expected from the patient so that the patient can have some peace of mind, or if it's something really bad, then at least there's some certainty. And that goes to the whole notion of us, I guess, always expecting that. But
Yep.
sometimes there is no certainty, right? I mean, actually, in most cases in life, there is no certainty.
Yeah. So I live in California, which means that by definition I have a therapist.
Of
And my
course,
my
I
my,
thought you
de-
had
my
three. But
yeah, sure, sure, yeah, yeah. But my therapist has this great phrase where she says, "Name it to tame it."
Mhm.
Which the idea is that if you're depressed or anxious or whatever you are, understanding what's happening and giving it a name makes it much more manageable. So
Mhm.
instead of saying, oh, I've got these terrible bleak feelings and I feel very sad, you can say, oh, I'm depressed, and that sort of at least you know what you're dealing with at that point. And I think that's the same for medicine, that and for so many years, for centuries, probably, or millennia, like, medicine was just naming things, right? That was all they could do. They couldn't treat anything. So medicine was just naming things. And even today, like, there's a lot of things that are just giving them a name just makes them sound so much better. So, for instance, there's a condition where you get kind of red lumps appear on your leg, right, on your
Mhm.
legs, and it's usually benign. Sometimes it can suggest something else that needs a bit of investigation, but usually it's very common and benign. And the name for this is erythema nodosum. And so the patient comes in and says, oh, I've got these terrible red lumps on my leg. I've never seen anything like it. Like, what on earth is it? And then as the doctor, you say, oh, that's erythema nodosum. And then immediately they're like, oh, great, you know what it is. But erythema nodosum is it's Latin or Greek, and it translates as red lumpy bits. So it's literally, they're coming in with red lumpy bits, and you're saying, oh, those are just red lumpy bits. And then that sort of that's somehow makes it all okay. Like it doesn't make it all okay, but it means that you've named it to tame it. It's suddenly not this absurd alien thing. So I guess
That is
that's
hilarious.
one.
That's also good for the pharmaceutical industry. So in Germany, I'm getting all these ads for Kona Shu. Do you have Kona Shu? And I was like, what the hell is Kona Shu? Kona Shu is Kopf, Nacken, Schulter. Okay, that's head, neck, and shoulder pain. And if
Oh.
you have those, it's called Kona Shu, and you get these pills, and it's all good. So anyway,
Oh
that's
my goodness me. That's amazing because that and what's so great about that is like I can't think of any medical condition that specifically gives you, those pains, but they've managed to find a way to market it to people. That's great. Yeah,
well, it's for
exactly it.
people who sit, who sit at a desk. You just have shoulder pain because you're sitting slumped over the computer for 12 hours,
Yeah.
because your job demands, and if you don't do it, then your boss will fire you, will become homeless. So let's take some Kona Shu. And it's just so ridiculous. I really think that the marketing people sit in there and they're having a good laugh because Kona Shu. Anyways, it's the beginning of these three German words.
Yeah,
Bixel says
brilliant.
here, not sure what bits and bobs would be in Latin, but that's what Dr. Simon Stephenson just said, Bixel. Do you have bits and bobs, Bixel? Maybe afterwards you could, Bixel here in the local chat, you could have a consultation with the doctor. Uh, and as a matter of fact, okay, we'll have Simon read in just a second. Stranger has a restless leg syndrome or RLS. Um, this
Exactly.
excerpt.
That's one. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's just the name is everything, isn't it? Like it's not really a diagnosis. It's just a description. But yet someone comes in with that. We say, oh, you've got restless leg syndrome. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like you said, I mean, it gives you certainty and it's delivered by a person who is seen and portrayed in media and also through himself as the infallible deliverer of yeah of diagnoses. And here this excerpt is also from your book. I love this. Hippocrates described diagnosis as the cornerstone of medicine. Perhaps I'd have believed that too if I hadn't been able to treat anything either. For much of history, a rudimentary diagnosis was indeed all that doctors could offer. Your liver is swollen and thus you have hepatitis and you will soon die. Your gallbladder is swollen and thus you have cholecystitis and will soon die. The lining of your heart is swollen and thus you have endocarditis and will soon die. But diagnosis, do people, Simon, do you push back at your shrink saying like, okay, if I can name it, it not always tames it, it also then becomes part of my personality and I define myself over it, which could be good, but it could also be a big problem.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I don't. I guess, yeah.
I mean, it
I
could
have a
provide comfort if you have, let's say, you have panic attacks and you feel like, okay, okay, here's full disclosure. In during my civil service when I was 20, I started having panic attacks, and I was working in a psychiatric hospital, and I thought I was going, I was studying all this, and I was like,
yeah,
oh, schizophrenic patients have these symptoms, and the first thought that came into my mind was, oh my God, I'm becoming psychotic, basically. So I went to the shrink on staff and say, you know what, I have these panic attacks. I'm gonna be I'm a psychotic now, right? And he says no, and he explained it to me. So uh, that was in that particular instance, it was uh, very important for me to get confirmation that I'm not quote unquote losing it completely and becoming schizophrenic.
yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely, because these things are terrifying, right? Like a panic attack is, by definition, a terrifying experience, and people think they're going to die the first time they have it, and they think they're having a heart attack, and all of that stuff, and to have someone who knows what they're talking about say, this is a panic attack, then I guess that can help. I mean, I don't love that term, like panic. Like it feels like it belittles it a bit.
Yeah.
I feel like there could be a a more modern way of phrasing that might be a more accurate description.
But I'm just using this example because now I'm thinking if the diagnosis can this diagnosis at that point in my life liberated me. But I guess my question is, can a diagnosis not also confine you, put you in a box and not let you out. I guess the I don't know what the solution would be, but can you think of a situation where a diagnosis can well, I can think obviously, let's say cancer or something really severe, depending on your personality and on your support system, that can certainly paralyze you. And I certainly wouldn't know how to deal with it from a diagnostic standpoint if I were the person who was giving the diagnosis. I guess this is a very convoluted
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
I guess I think that mostly, if people have sought care, if they've come to the doctor,
They come
by
for the
definition,
diagnosis. Yes, yes.
yeah, yeah, they put. I mean, the only exception I can think of is when I first started in medicine in 2001 was when I graduated, with some of the very, elderly patients. Um, sometimes the families would say, we don't want grandma to know about this diagnosis, that she has. She has, terminal cancer and 3 months left to live, and she's 95, and you know, and I always found that really troubling. But my boss had this very practical thing where he would go and talk to the patient, and he would say, if there was something going on, that was serious, would you want to know about it? And
Mm,
oftentimes they would say no,
mhm.
so sometimes with those people, they would obviously be straight up with the family, but they wouldn't necessarily tell grandma or great grandma. And it's a tricky one. I don't know if that still happens. Like I imagine we're sort of you know much hotter on autonomy and stuff these days, but equally, like, I can see that could be a kindness, right? That if you
Yeah.
don't want to know, why should anyone make you know it?
That is really great. I mean, I think that is a really good this is a really good way of dealing with it. Here, Shyla is saying though, here she says, I had the opposite feeling when they diagnosed my mother with terminal cancer. They would walk into the room where we both were and talked exclusively to me instead of her.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, there is this thing, isn't there? Like, I don't know how old Shila's mum was at that point, but you know, definitely there is this thing where sometimes people assume that, like, older people won't understand what's going on, or
Yeah.
talk down to them, and it's like, they're 80, they're not a child. They're just old.
That is interesting. Yeah, that's something. She was 79.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's sort of these bedside manners. There's also kind of the cliche notion that most doctors don't have them. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that goes to, actually, historically, doctors being selected for their academic skills, when actually
yep.
the more important skill is kind of the emotional intelligence. And I think they're much better at selecting for that now. But yeah, historically, it was all about academic, and of course, it was also like horribly white and horribly male, which doesn't necessarily help with compassion and things like that.
You play a little bit with that in the book with these exam questions, which is pretty hilarious, where several people take exams and they're just completely stereotypical. Like I don't know, I forgot now, but like one guy is of Jamaican descent and he's sitting there. I don't know, he's coming in. Yes, of course, he's a drug addict or whatnot. So they have to diagnose
Yeah.
us in these tests, and well, let's hope that they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely appalling, and it was true. It was a genuine bit of advice given to me, and it wasn't I don't think there was a Jamaican drug. It was more things like, say, it would be like, so for people listening, in your medical exams, often you're given this, like, scenario of, 50-year-old, whatever, comes in with this symptom, what's the most likely diagnosis? And there's, like, five possible diagnoses. And, like, there would be things like, if it was a 50-year-old nurse comes in with this diagnosis, then
Hmm.
the answer was always, it's a fictitious illness. She's faking it, like, just appalling.
Oh, wait a minute. Why would she be faking it?
So, just like, historic,
Women
like there.
exaggerate and are prone to hysteria.
I think that was the sort of the underlying thing, and also, I think healthcare workers, by definition, are slightly more likely to do that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But it was just these exams that really reflected this terrible prejudices of this, group of, 70-year-old white men that were born in 1920.
Monkey here says perhaps the emotional skills were expected from the nurses. Yeah, so the doctors go like, I don't have to be, I don't have to be kind and empathetic. That's what the nurse is for. Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which is interesting looking at the future, because you, the value in future, I think, is going to be empathy. Because AI is going to be better at diagnosis and all that kind of stuff than any doctor. So the real skill set is actually going to be the human interaction.
That is really a good point. That's always how I also see the technology being used. I mean, obviously, aside of like really having to change sort of the power structure that this technology is also available to everyone, but that's a real opportunity of technology dealing with certain things that then we humans do what we do best or what we should do best, which is emotionally connecting with other people. Uh, Absolutely. Now, okay, we need to have your read, but I wanted to. Okay, we'll deal with this a little bit later. Um, this is Simon Stephenson here today. Sometimes People Die is his um, new book, and it's about serial killers. And Simon, if I could ask you to stand up now, this is the part of the program where people used to fall off the stage, and now we have, of course, a hidden barrier there so people don't fall off. Perfect. Perfect. Simon is perfect here. Um, and you're going to read from the very beginning, which is a wonderful
Exactly.
little excerpt. Um, yeah, let's
Great.
just
Yep. So,
go right
oh,
into it.
great. So yeah, this is the prologue. It's right at the start. So here we go. Prologue. There was a moment I always loved in the hospital. It came after your pager had crackled into life to broadcast the disembodied voice of a bored switchboard operator. It came after you had dropped whatever you were doing, rushed down long corridors, and pushed your way through minors and into resus. It came after you had pulled on your gloves, drawn up your syringes, and unsheathed your needles. It came, finally, when you and 5 or 6 of your colleagues stood silently around the empty trolley and waited for whatever was about to happen. In that tranquil moment, alone from the time you entered the hospital until you left, there was nowhere more important you should be and nothing else you should be doing. Any second now, this room would be filled with raised voices, blood, electricity, saline, the hissing of gases, perhaps even the splintering of bone. Afterwards, when all was said and done, a human life would have been restored or extinguished. For now, though, like a heart in diastole, we waited in silent expectation for the chamber to be filled. As I sit down to write this, I have that same feeling for the first time in 20 years. A moment of peaceful anticipation before the doors crash open and I am once again engulfed in the swirling chaos of blood and life and death and everything else that occurred all those years ago.
And that's right from the beginning, the prologue of Sometimes People Die. Thank you, Simon. This is just really powerful. How much of the protagonist is the very obvious question. Are you a recovering drug addict? You don't have to answer that if it's
Yeah,
not the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
book.
No, I'm not. I mean, I think medicine definitely took its toll on me in other ways. I'm not a recovering drug addict. I think what is, I guess, the world of the book is very real. In that, I worked in, as a junior doctor in London hospitals, and you work in, you move around a lot. Yeah, I probably worked in most hospitals in London. Um,
And this is a
and
little bit
so
in a bad part of town too, we should say. I mean, not bad part, but it's a different clientele there, and I think it's important that it takes place there because maybe there's even more influx of patients and maybe a little bit more chaos. It's understaffed, and so the people don't really want to go there voluntarily. The personnel, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a big sort of it's really reductionist, but historically, I guess West London was the posher part of London, and East London was the less posh part. And I always lived and worked in East London, and poverty just brings with it, worse health.
Yeah.
People just have more problems, and so those hospitals are always busier. But then equally, I did work for 6 months in a hospital in West London, and it was like in a very fancy area, and it's kind of it's a slightly different kind of stress, in terms of um, you probably spend an awful lot more time, you know, having to explain why the Google printout isn't the right way to treat the patient.
Hmm. I'll have this. So the I'm looking here through the chat. There's so many good comments. You can take a seat, Simon. We'll have you stand up again. This is the little um, control, the only control that I can exert. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell people to sit down and stand back up again, and do a couple of push-ups and see how the blood pressure rises. I was going to ask, the book is also, there's some humor in it, which I think is great. And you mentioned earlier about I think you worked on with elderly folks in the geriatric ward. Is that right? Or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you do a bit of everything. Like, so my main thing was I did what's called general medicine in the UK, which would be internal medicine in the US, they'd probably call it. But it would be based in the hospital, so either inpatients or the emergency room, emergency. And then subsequently, I went and worked in pediatrics, but that was quite unusual. That was me sort of changing specialties.
there's actually somebody was asking, I think Stella said earlier here, how was it working with is working with kids different? Stella, please post it again. But the reason I'm asking about the elderly, what was a funny little bit in the book where uh people always ask, they come in to see their elderly relatives, and then they always ask the doctor about inheritance issues, or it kind of ends up that conversation, right? That's what you write in the book. I thought
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was
So
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 funny.
so 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 so, so the context is like in the UK there is this terrible crisis in social care that um the sort of like I don't know what happens in other countries, but like if you're if an old person becomes unwell in the UK and needs kind of long-term social care, which is that you basically need nursing care, but not in a hospital, then normally that's funded from if the person has means, that's funded from
From the
various
inheritance.
exactly, yes. So basically, an old person will go into that. They'll burn through everything that they've saved, and they'll have
Yeah.
sold their house to pay for it, and then they'll end up essentially with nothing. And not that I'm advocating for inherited wealth or anything like that, but it does end up being very stressful for the patient and their family. And so you do often get these conversations where people are wanting to know the exact financial details of that, and of course you don't have any idea. You're just treating their pneumonia or something.
It's interesting, and it's a serious matter. We had a great guest on last week who was delivering food in impoverished areas and Leeds, and we touched a little bit on medical services and those systems in the UK. So folks should check that out. So since you mentioned, Stella here says, did you handle adults? What about teens or children? And if so, was that a more crushing experience? So how in your own practice, when you work with children or teens, how was that? Was that
Yeah,
more
yeah.
difficult?
So I made this strange choice where I did adult medicine, and I kind of did all my residencies and all that, and I got to like quite a nice level. And then I decided, inexplicably, that the way to save the world was I should really be a children's doctor. That's what would be good, and that's what the world needed. And so I kind of sent myself back and redid a residency in that, and um, kind of not long after that, I left medicine. And I think if I had stayed in adult medicine, I probably wouldn't have ever left, or at least I wouldn't have as completely left as I have now. And I think um, yeah, I sort of had quite a naive impression of what what being a pediatrician would be like.
Hmm.
In terms of, I thought it would just be like, giving them an inhaler and sending them out to play, and it's all very
Yeah.
nice. And of course, I
Get the
mean,
tonsils out in the worst case, maybe, or that's it.
yeah, yeah, and kids. I mean, I think the other thing, like, it is actually kind of. I think people think of pediatrics as it's kind of children dying all the time, and in truth, that's very rare. Thankfully, kids are very resilient, and there's great treatments for lots of things these days. Um, but of course, when it does happen, it's devastating, and I think um, I think for me, it was. Yeah, that job, I found it tougher than adults, and frankly, it was too tough for me.
I think it's tough. I mean, I was in the children's ward at Stanford. My son had to come in. He had a pneumothorax at birth, and then
Oh
he had
wow.
to go in. Oh yeah, I mean, I could tell you that was so. We were so lucky. There was a pediatric surgeon on staff at that night. I mean, I don't even want to think about what would have happened if he wasn't there. That's another one of those. It was complete stroke of luck that he was there. But at Stanford, he was just there for a routine check, and then I was like just wandering around and saw the children's children with cancer there, and that's tough. I mean,
Yeah,
you have to be wired a certain way to do this day in, day out, no question.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, Here, Shyla was asking something. Shyla, I had the Shyla, if you could repost this here. Ah, yeah, about diagnosis from what we were talking earlier. This is an interesting comment. I think it's very hard when someone has a condition without a diagnosis. In the United States, without a recognized diagnosis, it can be hard to get proper treatment and benefits. How should we handle someone who cannot work but cannot be diagnosed either? That's
So yeah, yeah. So really important question, and actually kind of like, um, I think there is it is one of the many problems with American healthcare, and one of the great things about the NHS in Britain is the way it's structured is that you see a GP first, right? So the
Mhm,
gatekeeping for all the specialists is you see your GP and you tell them your symptoms, and if your GP thinks you need a specialist, they send you to the right one. Whereas in
mhm,
the US, a lot of times people can just bypass that first step, right? They don't have a family doctor and they can only afford to maybe see one doctor. So, someone tells them, oh, you need to see a neurologist. Whereas if they'd seen like a good general practitioner first, they would have thought, oh no, this is actually, this would be a rheumatologist, or this would be someone else that you need to see. So
mm,
I think the sort of the two things for me that I would say is one of them is a bit odd, and this is obviously like an unofficial um, uh, recommendation, but there's a forum on Reddit called Ask Docs, which is kind of full of but basically people with this problem, like sort of saying, I don't have insurance. These are my symptoms. What do I have? And often the advice that they only let sort of verified posters post, and but I just browse it sometimes out of interest, and often there was
mhm,
the advice is really good. It's really smart. So something like that, I think, it's obviously not my ideal solution, but that can help people hone down at least the kind of problem they might be having, and it's free advice and all of that stuff. So those resources are great. I think beyond that, a good primary care doctor, but yeah, it's impossibly tough, and I think this partly it goes to this binary thing that in medicine, I think historically we've thought, well, if this doesn't fit into any of our boxes, then you're making it up. And of course that's not true at all. And I think we are you know learning so much. For instance, say like long COVID.
yep.
I don't think anybody for a second is doubting the existence of long COVID. Whereas
You can find millions of people on Twitter who do that all the time, Simon, but
right,
that's a
sure, sure,
cesspool.
sure. Yeah. Okay.
It's
Okay. So,
depressing.
so, 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 so medically, I think doctors aren't doubting this existence.
Yeah,
Hopefully. Whereas, like,
hopefully.
people that have had, in the past, it's been, chronic fatigue syndrome or ME or it's a very, very similar um, set of symptoms. And because for a long time we didn't have, any explanation for that, you, the sort of the thinking from the medical profession was, it can't be real. And of course,
Yep.
I always think that like if we look back at what doctors in 1922 thought, we'd be horrified, right? Of course, we think they were so
Absolutely.
ignorant, they didn't know anything. And then so if we think about what doctors in 2122 think, they'll think that we're total barbarians and we don't understand anything.
Yep.
So I think, yeah, the medical profession does have quite a way to go there.
It's a continued it's a process. Monk says here, or told it's all in your head. I was actually in Edinburgh several years ago, and the bed and breakfast, wonderful place, was next to a old building where it said in big stone letters, "Home of the deaf and the dumb." Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the olden days, people thought that when you can't hear, you're also dumb. Um,
Just to pick you up on that, because I agree it's a terrible word, but in fact I think you're talking about. I'm from Edinburgh, and I think you're talking about Donaldson's School for the Deaf and Dumb. And dumb in that context was actually people that couldn't speak. It didn't mean
ah,
stupid. It meant people that couldn't speak.
okay, because now it's actually it's an advocacy group for deaf people. So they left that thing on there.
Yeah.
I looked into it. See, that's interesting. So you're saying the word meant something different back in those days.
Yeah. I think we would call it mute now. I think that would be
Ah.
the word. But yeah, deaf and dumb is like, at least
Okay.
in
I was
Britain
walking
previously
by
meant.
there going like, wow, medicine has advanced, thankfully. We
Yeah.
okay, good. That clears that up. Okay, good. Now, since we're at the definition stage here, you have something in the book. I wrote this down. On the late shift or the night shift, our protagonist encounters granny dumping.
Hmm.
What is granny dumping?
Yeah, so this is a real thing, and I couldn't believe this when I started work. It's
Can
one of
somebody
those things
Google
that, like,
granny dumping? Oh
yeah,
my
it's
God.
it's it's one of those things that in medical school no one tells you, and then you start working, and like one Friday's so busy, and they're like, oh, it's been granny dumping. And so basically in Britain, that like everywhere, they often have a Monday holiday, which they call a bank holiday. So it makes for a long weekend. From Friday through Monday, and there's a really classic thing that sort of people that say have an old relative that lives with them, but they want to go away for the weekend. And there's not really any, again, it's part of the problem that there just isn't social care, there isn't respite care, there
Yep.
isn't enough respite care. But so the classic thing would be that they bring their relative to accident and emergency on Friday morning and say, grandma's really not right. She's been having chest pain. We think she also has a fever. We think she needs to come into hospital. And grandma would say, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I want to go to Blackpool with you. like, and then they basically leave grandma or grandpa there, and then obviously the hospital. You're not going to throw them out. So then
Yeah.
they come back and pick them up on Monday and
Damn.
take
Damn, I
them
had
home.
no idea.
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me this when my grandmother was still alive? I'm just kidding. But, I love my grandmother above everybody. Above
Yeah, me too.
Bo says here, actually that that's why one of the seven dwarfs is actually called dumb. He cannot talk. See, I
Ah,
didn't put two and two together. Jesus Christ. Okay. The other
interesting.
thing that's happened in your book is actually broken heart syndrome. Is that a real thing?
This is a real thing, and actually, like my aunt just had it. Funnily enough, so it's definitely a real thing. So yeah, broken heart syndrome is when I think we've all seen those news stories or known those people where say someone's been married for 75 years and their partner dies, and then they die the next day,
Yeah.
and people say, oh, they died of a broken heart. Or the other one is like, you get some sudden bad news and you fall down dead. And so basically what can happen is, the pathology is still not entirely clear, but basically you get a sort of massive release of adrenaline, and it can actually kind of physically remodel your heart, which can manifest kind of essentially as a heart attack. It means your heart just if it's really severe, doesn't work as well. And it's kind of increasingly recognized. Like, it's the problem is that it's a diagnosis that you can really only make if you do an echocardiogram and an ultrasound of the heart, which for many years wasn't a sort of standard test, and probably still isn't a standard test on admission unless people have something particularly going on. And the formal name for broken heart syndrome is Sakasubo syndrome, which is a Japan. Sakasubo is a, believe it or not, it's a Japanese octopus trap, because the appearance that they see on the ultrasound looks like apparently a particular kind of octopus trap that they have in Japan, where like an octopus gets trapped when they're fishing for it, and that the heart takes on that shape.
Wow, this is amazing. I had no idea. This is oh yeah, Monkey's posting here from the Mayo Clinic, the broken heart syndrome. Uh, Simon, it's time to do another reading.
Right?
And this reading is, like I said earlier, there's sprinkled in are various biographies of murderers in healthcare, nurses, doctors, and others. And it's really interesting, and it's pretty gruesome. Before you read I think you're going to read the oldest one, or the first recorded one. I want to read this excerpt here, just as you write in the book about why killing at a hospital, if you're a murderer, is probably a pretty good place to be. In the book you write, or the narrator writes, our lives depend on the expertise of our doctors and nurses, and we sometimes have no choice but to surrender ourselves to their secret mastery of their opaque arts. The notion that a healthcare worker might intentionally harm a patient is therefore a profoundly troubling one. And yet, a hospital is an almost perfect hunting ground for those motivated to end rather than enhance human life. It is, after all, a place filled with the weak and vulnerable, the incapacitated and the mute. It is a place where privacy is prized and secrecy is mandated. It's a place where death is an everyday occurrence. And as a matter of fact, in the book, yeah, it just occurred to me what is really interesting. In the beginning, I thought like, okay, how did they find out that in St. Luke, where this all takes place, uh, that there is how do they suspect murder? So it's basically uh, an anomaly, a statistical anomaly, right? Where the cops go like, okay, normally there's this amount of people die, but now it's like that amount, so there's something weird, and then the cops come in and they start investigating. Is that how it normally works? I mean, what's the kind of the oversight um, structure as far as you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is part of the problem. I think is that there isn't really kind of formal oversight in that way, because people do die in hospital. It's normal.
Yeah, I was wondering
You know
I mean, what is normal for the cops, or what is not normal, let's put it that way, for the cops to say, okay, this is now the time to investigate,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
What's the normal number?
Yeah, so what happens in England is there's like particular circumstances in which people have to have a post-mortem. So if they come into hospital and die within the first 24 hours, they
Hmm.
have to have like a coroner's post-mortem. If they die unexpectedly in hospital, they have to have a post-mortem. If they die unexpectedly in the community, they have to have a post-mortem. But this still leaves like a vast amount of people that if they have some chronic condition and they're in hospital, like I don't know what the percentages are, but I would say it's a very small percentage of people that have a post-mortem. And that's probably right, because post-mortems can be very distressing for the family. We don't need to go into it, but obviously it's a quite a brutal process, that the mechanics of it. So yeah, it's kind of it comes down, I guess, to just suspicion and a sense of what's normal. And I think that's
Yeah, like an
that,
average number, maybe something that averages out for a bunch of years, and then one month it's up a little bit, and people go, wait a
yeah,
minute, there's something wrong.
yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? Is that it needs to be, it's often over a period of time. So like one death that in hindsight can look suspicious. At the time, people might not think anything of it. And it's sort of alarmingly, one thing that's, in a few of the stories in the book, like what fairly often happens is, there's clearly some suspicion, like the extract you read at the start of the German man of Niles Hogan. That they were obviously suspected something was going on, but they just, gave them a reference to go and work at another hospital because
Hmm.
they weren't sure, and they couldn't prove anything. And like, for instance, we don't need to go too into it, but there's a case in Britain at the moment where um, there's a nurse, and she was put on day shifts only
Okay,
because
I'm
they
gonna put up her picture now because, and I
okay.
can't look at it because I'm gonna get nightmares. This Lucy Letby is accused of 22 counts for the murder of 17 babies. Babies.
Yeah, just absolutely horrific.
You
And
continue, Simon. You were saying, yeah.
yeah, well, with her, I think, I was reading about this morning, and she was, at some point, she was transferred just onto day shifts because they were so worried about, what was happening at night. And of course, you kind of, with hindsight, you think, well, if you had those concerns, you can't just transfer onto day shifts, right? You have to
Yeah.
really actually, call the police. But I think that's the problem, is that, it could, like, looked at another way, like, if they'd had, a few suspicious incidents, when she was working, I can see how you could think, oh, that's just bad luck, like, because things do happen unexpectedly and things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the sort of identifying these cases has always been a real problem, and a real challenge. One of the worst ones in Britain was a general practitioner called Harold Shipman, who was active kind of in the 90s, and he
We
was
got
he
a
was a single.
collage of all of them. Shyla made a collage of all of
Oh
them. Here we
wow.
go. I'm just gonna keep this up. I'm gonna look away.
Yeah. Wow, that
But
really is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it?
go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So Harold Shipman, he was, kind of active in the 90s, and he was a single-handed GP, which meant that he was a GP who just kind of only, he didn't have, like, he wasn't in a practice. He just worked by himself, and they've kind of, essentially banned that after that situation, because it was so. It was it he didn't have any oversight at all. He saw the patients, he wrote the death certificates, and that was kind of that. So I guess there are these structural things they can do to try and catch these people, and spot
Right.
it. But I think it's a real challenge, because it's just so transgressive. It's just you wouldn't, you know it's so the opposite of what the people are there to do, that, like, how you spot it is, I think, a real challenge.
This is really interesting. So it's not only just basically, people pushing something under the rug because they don't want to deal with it. It really is it's a problem that is not that easy to solve, even if everybody is a good faith actor
Yeah,
in
because
that system.
you can't make accusations without evidence, can you? It's an incredibly
Right.
serious accusation. Um,
Whew, I got to take that picture down.
yeah,
Now,
please,
and Simon, please stand up and read from the first recorded killer. At least
okay, yeah.
that was a long time ago. We're not going to have to be afraid. Right click your
Yeah,
chair and choose
I
stand.
I was doing so
And
well, wasn't I?
yeah, yeah.
I'm on
Well,
kind of like the, like, oh, there we go. Hang on, this is going to do it.
I'm a doctor in my second life as well. Dr. Axter says you need to a little bit exercise. Your avatar
Yeah,
needs
there we go. Good, good,
exercise.
good. Yeah,
There we
you got
go.
it. Oh,
And you're reading from the first recorded, the oldest medical murderer. What was his name?
his name was Xenophon, which is spelled with an X. So the first recorded healthcare murder may have been committed in AD 54 by the Greek physician Xenophon. Xenophon was born on the island of Kos and trained there at the sanctuary of Asclepius, the healing god. Hippocrates himself had studied there a few hundred years before Xenophon, but the father of medicine's famous exhortation to first do no harm does not seem to have formed part of any curriculum that Xenophon studied. After completing his training, Xenophon traveled to Rome, where he eventually rose to the position of personal physician to the Emperor Claudius. In this role, Xenophon became one of the emperor's most trusted advisors, even traveling with him on his military campaigns. In recognition of Xenophon's long service, in AD 54, Claudius granted his home island of Cos immunity from Roman taxation. Although undoubtedly intended as a great honor, this was not necessarily of direct benefit to Xenophon himself, who was widely understood to have a compulsory job for life at his emperor's side in Rome. A few months later, Claudius abruptly died from what classical sources agree was an act of poisoning. Claudius's ambitious wife Agrippina is said to have obtained toxic mushrooms from a notorious poison maker and fed them to the emperor at dinner. When the mushrooms failed to dispatch Claudius and instead merely made him unwell, Claudius sent for Xenophon to revive him. Under the guise of provoking purgative vomiting, Xenophon used a feather to introduce yet more poison to Claudius and thereby complete the deed on behalf of Agrippina. On Claudius's death, Agrippina's son Nero became emperor of Rome. Xenophon's own motives for participating in the assassination of his only patients are unclear, but perhaps he simply wanted to retire. With Claudius dead, he was able to return to Kos, where he lived out the life of leisure on his now tax-free Roman riches.
Very, very interesting. So it's greed and women. I knew it all along. And early retirement, I guess. That's yeah. Simon, thank you. This is Simon Stephenson reading from Sometimes People Die. Well, the obligatory quick question here, what's more fun, writing a screenplay um, or a book?
Oh, a book, 100%. Um,
Why?
uh, so so with a book, it's just you, right? You get to write it, and it's you can make it as you want it to be, and someone can decide whether to publish it or not. But with a screenplay, it's much more it's collaborative, and there's notes involved, and that's great. Like, don't get me wrong, some of those collaborations can be brilliant. I've been very lucky to work with some incredibly collaborative people, but also as a screenwriter, a lot of times you're kind of fairly low, certainly in film, which I mainly work in, you're fairly low down the pecking order in terms of you're often, in some ways, frankly, a technician there to kind of help achieve the director's vision, which is great if they're collaborative and they have a great vision, but sometimes that doesn't work out quite so well.
But I thought that has, sorry to interrupt, I thought that has changed a little bit. I mean, you worked on big Pixar movies. I thought that the reputation of the screenwriter has gotten a little higher, I guess, over the years.
So very good point. So I think what they classically say is that film is still a director's medium, but
Hmm.
television is a writer's medium. So I think if you're a television screenwriter, this is where you hear of like showrunners and things like that. I think they really do run things. But yeah, I made the mistake of going into film instead of television. So here we are.
Is it still completely sort of segregated? Can you jump from one to the other, or that's kind of hard? Do people
No,
try
no,
that and
yeah,
fail?
yeah. There's much more sort of going back and forth now. I think, yeah, like absolutely, you can go back and forth. I mean, one of the fun things about the books is that you get to kind of often, if you're lucky enough for your book to be optioned, you get to write the adaptation of it, which is kind of the best of both worlds.
That is very cool. I can imagine a scenario though if they have somebody else. I mean, I offend people often when I tell them that I hate the Neverending Story, the movie, because people my age and a little younger, especially Americans, for them it's like I'm destroying their biggest uh, childhood
Yeah,
memory.
right.
But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is that Michael Ende is, one of the most famous German writers, not only young adult, but also he wrote for adults as well. But the Never Ending Story and Momo and a bunch of other books, and he just hated this film. And when you read the book, A Never Ending Story, I can completely understand that for him this must have been a complete nightmare to just see this film. As much care as Wolfgang Petersen and the whole crew put into this film, from his perspective, his story was destroyed. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah,
think that can be
yeah.
really hard for an artist to witness
I,
that. Yeah.
I think there's a famous one that I think Stephen King famously hates the film of The Shining.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
I don't think I'm making that up. I think that's the one. Yeah.
People Google verify quickly. And do you know
No, no,
why?
don't Google. Wait till we finish. No, I'm pretty sure it's that. If it's not that, it's some other major one. So I probably shouldn't be saying that, but I'm pretty sure it's that one.
Um, Now I want to say what I hate. I hate true crime. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just saying, this is not for me. I actually think it's a little problematic. I mean, I don't want to put blame on anybody, but I think the prevalence of true crime in the media is not helpful in for many different important questions about society and I don't know, reshaping society in a positive way and so on and so forth. I know I'm being intentionally vague, but I want to ask you how you feel about true crime. What is very funny about your book is that the one of the detectives in the story is arresting someone who is not the killer, and he writes a really bad book about his experience, how I arrested the angel of death. I forgot now what the book title was, but it's a hilarious little stab. Obviously, you're against also a detective who is capitalizing on basically a stroke of luck, basically, which then turns out not even to be true. Sorry, spoiler alert, but it's hilarious. But people make so much money with true crime. I mean, I don't know what the question is. What do you think about true crime, Simon?
Yeah. So I'm with you. So, but in fact, I'm kind of the worst of both worlds in that, like, I do find myself consuming a lot of it, but equally I absolutely do worry about what it may do to us. And I kind of feel like it's always been around, right? Like, In Cold Blood might have been one of
That's true.
really
Good point.
spectacular.
Yes,
But I think the way our culture is just
we have a
so,
fascination. Mhm.
yeah, but right now the culture is just so saturated with it, isn't it? It's like
Yep.
if you look at the podcast charts on Apple Podcasts, like the
Yep.
first 10 are often just always true crime, and yeah, you do kind of worry, like if we're all thinking about that all the time, is that necessarily good for it? I mean, I think the other, I guess there's an explanation that I heard that, like, um, there's a sort of, and maybe it's a bit spurious, but this idea that the reason we like it is that it's somehow in some way educational and may just help us to keep just a little bit safer.
See,
I'm
this is
I'm kind of,
exactly. And you know what? I'm sorry. This I hate this because we have a good friend who is a producer of reality television. I mean, my wife went to college with her, whatever. It's not we're not good friends, but we visit them, and she used to say that reality television is basically sociological research, and I say frankly, sorry, BS. It's exploitation of the misery of people, and it's sort of packaging in a way that is like, oh, look, that we're learning something. No, it is extremely exploitative, and I feel that most, and I know I'm completely cognizant that we're painting with a huge broad brush here, where I say true crime. There's a lot of nuance within that. There's a bunch of good podcasts, I would say, that are more nuanced and all that. But as a whole, I think it's problematic if we, just like tabloids, when it bleeds, it leads, as they used to say. The
yeah,
exploitative part of it is obvious, and it's making me sick, frankly.
yeah. I'm really confused as to how to feel about Serial. I'm sure you guys all followed it and then
Very,
saw the
very
news
good point with
that
cereal. And there was oh my God, sorry. I'll let you speak, but everybody please put on the media.org into the local chat, because they had a interview with the attorney for the boy who was imprisoned in the serial podcast, and she is very critical of that podcast in a very nuanced way. But anyway, go ahead, Simon.
well, yeah, because I guess even at the time, I felt a bit weird and guilty, like reading all about this poor girl's murder and her not really being a part of it. And then, but the news yesterday that, the person that was, convicted of it has now been, by the authorities completely exonerated. Um, you have to say that, well, that podcast did seem to do some good, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to think maybe this wouldn't have happened without all that attention. So I don't know. I suppose maybe some of them serve a purpose beyond simple entertainment and titillation, but it's troubling. And so someone just brought up Dharma in the comments there, and um, I actually watched the first one last night, and I almost couldn't watch it. Like it was so it was a really tough watch. Partly because I mean, I think entirely because it's real. And these people actually went through this.
Yeah. When people, I'm looking at on the media, but people can look at that themselves. I posted the serial link into the local chat, but what is even more interesting is that one of the attorneys has criticized that particular podcast, which was also, I thought, like Simon, you did, that here's somebody, a journalist who is looking at a case and sort of really investigating the case that was done with, and did some good, but there was it's a really nuanced critique. I can't look find it right now. But anyways, we have 8 minutes left. I want to pick up what you said earlier about, or we already mentioned it earlier. I really love the ending. I know endings are very hard. Uh, I just published a documentary where it took me a long time to write. So this final essay of this documentary, it's tough. I mean, I don't know how you do it, Simon. It's terrible. And then you do it over
Um,
again, but it has to be
I
done, right?
Yeah, I start with the ending usually. I like I often don't know the middle when I start, but I always know the beginning
Yeah.
and the end. Um,
But do you know? But okay. But I'm not talking the plot necessarily here now. I mean, the plotting is excellent in the book, but I also mean the more philosophical take of sort of, I don't know, like it's like an essay what he sort of ruminates about the randomness of
yeah,
life, right? And
I
is there a purpose? Is there a high purpose? Is there no purpose? And is this all fatalism? Is he resigning himself to this or not? And those are the questions that we all deal with, uh, frankly, or should. I mean, that's part of the human condition of it, but the way you write it up is very fresh, I think. Yeah.
well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I love the way that you introduced it. That it's kind of about two things. The book overall, it's about why on earth people commit this just incredibly terrifying and transgressive crime, but also the flip side of what we ask of our healthcare workers. And so yeah, I suppose I was just trying to I guess answer those questions or not answer those questions because they may not really have an answer.
But I also mean, not only why do people kill in the medical profession, but the whole thing about life, and this is going throughout the book without anybody being murdered, but just the reality of life itself and how it plays out in the daily grind of hospital work. That some people, well, this is the title, sometimes people die. And a lot of people would object to this, um, and they would say, well, there is a higher purpose. I mean, I had I lost. I know you lost your brother. I lost my mother at an early age. Those are things where you will spend a considerable amount of time with the question, why me, right?
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
after a while, at least for me, I mean, I this now happened 30 years ago, and I made peace with it, in the sense that that's why the title of your book resonates with me. It just happened. I mean, this is what happened to me, and it had consequences. But it's tragic. My mother was 49. But there are other things that are happening, and it's not, I don't know how to phrase it. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah,
sound like
yeah,
callous or anything because some people go like, "Oh my, how can you say that?" Well, the thing is that there is a randomness to life, quite frankly. We are little specks floating around in the universe. Sorry. That's
yeah.
how I feel about things.
Absolutely. I always use the metaphor of like it's if you lose someone, it's like a bomb going off, right? And it
Yeah.
just depends how close you're standing to that bomb. That there's all if you hear a friend of an acquaintance has died, you say, oh, that's very sad, poor them, But of course, if it's someone very close to you, it's a much a, a, a much more difficult thing to deal with. And I guess the sometimes I think of this book in the context of my first book, which was a memoir about losing my brother. And that book was all in on you, like it was all about death and grief and like the sort of the journey of grief and honoring the dead person and all of that stuff. Um, and so you could read that book and probably think my brother was the first person to ever die in the history of the world. Because it was I went so into it and it was so important to me to get all that stuff across. And then this book is kind of absolutely not a companion piece, but maybe it's like the opposite end of the spectrum. In terms of acknowledging that yes, unfortunately we live in a world where things happen every day.
Mhm. Sam, your first book here, it's on the table here. Maybe the camera can pan over. Let Not the Waves of the Sea. Very, very good book. A wonderful book and an important book. Please, somebody post the link. I can't find it here. Just maybe Shallow or Monkey can put it in the local chat. Um, yeah, I mean, there's nothing more to add. This is well put. This is your transition uh, from book one to book three, I guess. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
in a way.
absolutely, and yeah, exactly. And I'm sure I kind of suspect that if I'd lost someone in the past years, I wouldn't have been able to write such a dispassionate book. I think
Yeah.
in life we go through different phases, don't we?
Well, you covered all the three phases that with life we go through because the middle book is Set My Heart to Five, which interestingly enough seems to be, I didn't do an official poll, but among our book club regulars, it seems to be in the top five or top 10 books.
Oh
Um,
wow! Well, I'm
yeah,
thrilled to hear that. Great,
yeah.
thank you. Wow, brilliant. That's made my day.
I mean, you are competing with Will Wiles, who is also an excellent writer. I highly recommend Care of Wooden Floors and The Way In. But Simon, we love your work very much, and we hope that your books get a huge success and you get fired from your screenwriting job to write more books.
Me too.
I'm joking. I don't have any psychic powers. Please, don't blame me. Um, this is the end of the program. We have to cut it. We have to cut it precisely at this time. Simon, thank you very much for coming. Is any last words?
I just want
Where
to
are
say
you
thank
going
you.
now?
I'm just staying at home today, I think. But yeah, no, I mean, thank you for having me. I love coming here. I love chatting to you and meeting the guys and this beautiful stage that you make. So yeah, thank you for having me.
This theater, by the way, was built for the Set My Heart to Five, so people can look around. There's a lot of references to the book. Ruby, who now goes by the way of Bo Venus, she sits here, I think, in the
Oh,
back
hey.
there somewhere. She built it all, and people can explore it. And well, we have I don't know, we have like 500-600 people visit the book club island every day. Not particularly this
Wow.
theater, but
Yeah.
but as a totality, and people can visit. And thank you, Simon. Thank you, audience. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining the YouTube channel. Big thank you to Kitten Duo, who is a member of the YouTube channel. Oh, wait, here's a bunch of comments. Moon Leandra Zeta says, Stephen King has quite a bad taste in movies. If in fact it's true that he didn't like The Shining, yeah, I have to agree. Um, Also, I'm gonna put another link here. We were talking about the serial podcast. Adnan Said was the name of the boy who was imprisoned, and the serial podcast kind of broke or rebroke that story and investigated it. And the public radio show On the Media is investigating the investigation of that and what if if true crime podcasts are good, bad, or somewhere in between. Um, if you like to support this program, you can join a YouTube channel, like I said, but you can also tip the tip jar. And the tip jar is around here somewhere. I don't know where the tip jar is. Oh, it's that statue right here. Maybe the camera can pan over it. The Second Life Book Club happens every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time, which is also Second Life time. SL Book Club at Draxtor.com is the email of the program. The show is produced by Isabel Sharon, Shyla the Super Gecko, myself, location manager and master builder Ruby Geek, aka Bo Venus. The avatars are made by Ruby and Bespoke Caravan. The research is by Shyla and Monkey. I think Shyla asked another question. If you have a question, we I can throw it out there or a comment. Just put it out there. Um, Stranger says he should have hated The Shining. He's a much better storyteller than Kubrick was in that film, says Stranger. Okay, so Stranger, Nightfire, and Stephen King both hate The Shining, the movie, the movie. We we have a lot of sponsors. Sponsors mean that people give us Second Life products to place and build our sets. You can go down the list, or if you wander around, you can right click the object and see if you like it. Then, if you buy something from that vendor, just tell them you found it at the book club. Book Club, Draxter.com. Jared the Bot, a character from Simon's Set My Heart to Five, is actually an avatar, Jared Bot. And if you have recommendations, you can send him an IM and he will forward it to me. There's a lot of links around the Book Club Island to the calendar, to the Discord, to the Flickr. You can check all that stuff out. Next week, we have something very strange. We actually don't have a book, but we have a text-based adventure, an online adventure game, which is based on a futuristic fictional Wikipedia. It's called Neurocracy 2049. This is a first for the book club, and Johannes Truyens is the creator of Neurocracy 2049. You can play it now on omnipedia.app. It's quite fascinating. People know that I'm not a gamer, but I'm highly fascinated by non-visual games. So this is purely text-based. There are some images in there. Absolutely fascinating concept. And that's next week, October 19th at 12 p.m. Second Life time, right here on the Second Life Book Club. Thank you and goodbye. Oh, big thank you, Kitten Duo, for the super chat. And Kitten Duo is also a member for 11 months. I need to give